on financial transfers bolstered suspicions that Russia offered bounties. Bountygate. This is actually, there have been a lot of really crazy stories and shocking stories during the last 4 years of Donald Trump's presidency. This actually might be the most shocking. Not surprising, but shocking. Here's the subhead. Analysts, this is the New York Times reporting, analysts have used other evidence to conclude that the transfers were likely part of an effort to offer payments to Taliban-linked militants to kill Americans and coalition troops in Afghanistan, meaning U.S. and also British troops. American officials, here's the reporting. It's by Charlie Savage, Mujab Mashal, Rukmini Kalamaki, Eric Schmidt, and Adam Goldman. So lots and lots of reporters on this. So this is a heavily reported story that NBC News has actually confirmed this reporting. So this is now pretty broad reporting, but this is the New York Times original reporting. American officials intercepted electronic data showing large financial transfers from a bank account controlled by Russian military intelligence, a Russian military intelligence agency, to a Taliban-backed account, which was among the evidence that supported their conclusion that Russia covertly offered bounties, money, for killing U.S. and coalition troops in Afghanistan, according to 3 officials familiar with the investigation.
Scandalous.
It's scandalous on so many levels. First of all, of course, Donald Trump is denied. Now, his denial of this story has not been, how dare you say that I, Donald Trump, President of the United States, Commander-in-Chief of the United States military, would stand by as American troops are hunted by the Taliban for money from Russia. No. Russia, if you did this, it's going to be held to pay. No. What we're hearing is, nobody told me anything about that. So the denial from Donald Trump is, nobody ever told me that. So there are only 2 options in the Trump defense. Either nobody told him about that, which raises the question of why senior White House and senior national security officials would not tell him that. Because if you wouldn't want to tell him that, the only reasons not to tell a president of the United States, who is commander-in-chief of the United States military, that Russia, our adversary, which already attacked our election, was now paying bounties to Afghan militants in Afghanistan, Taliban militants in Afghanistan, who we've been fighting for, 15 freaking years after 9/11, to kill U.S., British, and coalition troops. The only reason not to tell him that would be A, because you think he'd be mad because he's so pro-Russia. And so he doesn't want to hear bad news about Russia because Russia is his friend and he wants Russia to be his friend, and he refuses to hear negative information about Russia because it also will tweak his anger at feeling like his election was being undermined because Russia helped him, and he doesn't like the fact that people know Russia helped him. And so any bad news about Russia will make him mad, so you don't want to tell him. That's one reason not to tell him, that you don't trust that he will react in the right way because, right? The only other reason not to tell him is because he's completely disengaged from his government, that he actually isn't the president, that he actually doesn't do the job of president, doesn't read his daily briefs, doesn't pay attention to national security, that his job is actually to play golf and tweet.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't mean to cut you off. Or the biggest one at all. He just doesn't give a damn.
Well, the third issue, that's not a not to tell him reason. The third
maybe
issue,
they told him he just doesn't give a damn.
And that is door number 3. And door number 3 is the worst of the 3 doors. Door number 1 is that Donald Trump is so fixated on positive, weird fixation of loving Russia. And it's weird, and it's sinister in a lot of ways. It's strange, that he would never want to hear anything. But don't tell me anything bad. Don't nobody bring me no bad news about Russia. Don't nobody bring me no bad news if it's about Russia, right? That's one door. Door number 2 is I'm completely disengaged. I just want to play golf. Like, if this isn't about golf, don't tell me anything. Don't tell me bad news. But door number 3 is the worst door. The worst door is that he did know, that he was told, that he was briefed, that he was absolutely told that our adversary, Russia, has been paying money to militants in Afghanistan who are with the Taliban or associated with the Taliban to kill our troops, and he just doesn't care.
You know what he told his advisors? This is fake news. You guys want me to go out there and say something to my buddy Vlad that is not true. I can guarantee they told him he just didn't give a damn.
So we don't know the answer to that, but what we do know, I mean, just based on the fact that this is now not just vague reporting. So there was a briefing as of the day that we're recording this, which is the last day of June. We're right at the end of June when we're recording this. There was a briefing on this very issue on Capitol Hill from White House senior advisors that was only for Republicans. No Democrats were invited. Just to repeat again, the briefing that was done on this incredible scandal, this is the biggest scandal other than being helped by a foreign country to get elected president of the United States, other than getting impeached for trying to bully a foreign country to help you get reelected president of the United States, other than the scandal that Donald Trump apparently begged China to help him get reelected president of the United States, other than the scandal of going to Helsinki, Finland, and genuflecting before Vladimir Putin like he's your boss or your daddy, like he's the man and you're the sidekick, like he's Ponch and you're John, you know, like he's the boss, and like he's, you know, Pinky and you're the brain, or no, you're Pinky and he's the brain, like that. Other than all those other scandals,
could it be like cat dog? Who's cat? Who's dog?
Well, cat dog are kind of equal.
Yeah,
I actually feel like cat dog are equal.
Dog.
Cat's probably a little smarter than dog.
Yeah.
So maybe like he's cat and your dog. Okay, he's cat and your like Putin is cat and your dog.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, cat's a little smarter than dog.
Slaps him every time he acts up.
No, you're absolutely right. Cat is kind of above. They're not equal.
Swats at him.
They're actually not equal. But, you know, like, right, like it's cat dog, but you're cat and he. But, you know, but America's supposed to be cat, not dog. But, I mean, you know, other than the scandal of having 125,000 Americans and counting die on your watch from a pandemic that you were warned about and did nothing about, other than those scandals, other than caging children and stealing them from their parents, other than those scandals. So there's a lot of scandals to compete with it, but even with all of those, I mean, the idea that the commander-in-chief of the United States sat back and did nothing, has had multiple calls with Vladimir Putin since this scandal happened, right? So this was happening last year. He was apparently briefed.
They had conversations 6 times.
Correct. And he was apparently briefed around the time he was getting impeached or shortly thereafter. He has since spoken a half a dozen times to Vladimir Putin. He has not one time, even since this broke. Let's say he knew nothing. Let's say Donald Trump knew nothing about. They just don't tell him things. They hide things from him. He just didn't know. Okay, let's say that's true. Since he now knows, because it's in the New York Times, which he obsessively reads, because he keeps looking for positive headlines for himself in the New York Times. He's obsessed with the New York Times giving him good coverage. So he obsessively, I don't know if he reads it, but somebody gives him bullet points on what's in the New York Times.
Looks at the pictures.
He looks.
And then says, "Oh, it's about me."
That was Jason who said that, not Joy.
I did say that.
The bottom line being, now you know Donald Trump. You know the information today. Where is the all testosterone-filled tweet and statement and walking out to the podium in the Rose Garden and saying, Russia, you mess with our troops, we mess with you. Stand down. If you're paying money to get our troops killed, it's your ass.
Damn, baby, that turned me on. You said that all kind of, oh, wow. Do that again. Say that again. Say it again, yeah.
Where is that response to Russia? Why can't Donald Trump ever give the kind of full testosterone-filled attitude to Vladimir Putin that he gives to black protesters and that he gives to black NFL players for kneeling? He's got all the testosterone for people who take down Confederate statues, all the testosterone. But where is it when it comes to Vladimir Putin? What is it about this particular person that he seems to so admire and he seems to be so subservient to? The other thing I will add is that Donald Trump, in a lot of ways, and we talked about this a lot with Malcolm Nance, with Sarah Kendzior, with Naveed Jamali, and a lot of people like these people are taking it too far about Donald Trump's desire to not just gain the respect and adoration and love of Vladimir Putin. He wants the adoration of Vladimir Putin, it's clear. But also to be Vladimir Putin. He wants to be him. He wants to be Xi of China. He wants to be Kim Jong-un. He wants to have the kind of power they have. He admires the leaders of countries like Brazil. They call him the Trump of the tropics. He admires the Philippine leader. He admires these people who are autocrats. He admires people whose style of government is autocracy, pure, naked autocracy. He does not admire those who govern as small d Democrats. He thinks people like Angela Merkel are weak. He thinks people who govern through democracy are weak. People who let in migrants that are not white and that are not Christian are weak. He thinks the strong people, the people that are to be admired, are autocrats. He admires the leader of Saudi Arabia, MBS. He and his family seem to have great affection for them because they are autocrats. And so, today we are going to have a conversation with somebody who has been sounding the alarm since the very beginning about the potential for the United States to become an autocracy under Donald Trump. This is somebody who warned and saw what he wants to be from the very, very beginning and warned this country, and who would know about it. This is somebody who would know because they came from the old Soviet Union. And so their family is of autocracy and escaped to a democracy, this democracy, and now sees in the rearview mirror that objects that look like autocracy are bigger than they may appear. And joining me now is somebody who you will know very well, who will be very familiar to those who watch AM Joy, going all the way back to 2016, when my next guest was sounding a warning that I think too few people really paid attention to. And unfortunately, sometimes being right is not a happy thing. And I'm not so sure that Masha Gessen is excited about having been right about what we're facing now. Masha Gessen, National Book Award winner, is the author of Surviving Autocracy. And you can just go ahead and guess what that's about. I'm going to introduce Masha now. Masha, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's always great to talk to you. And actually, I'm really excited about getting to talk to you in a little more depth, because I know with TV we get a few minutes, but now I get to keep you here for a little bit longer to talk about this book. And you talked about and warned about not just the autocratic tendencies of Donald Trump when he was running for president, but also the ways in which he mirrored autocracies in other countries. Including in, the USSR, now this in Russia, now what we call Russia. But you open your book in your prologue talking about the Trump response to COVID-19. And you make it analogous in some ways to the Soviet government's response to the Chernobyl accident in 1986. In what ways do you think they are similar?
That's quite an extraordinary thing because if you recall, in ancient history, when the coronavirus pandemic just started and the HBO Chernobyl series was still fairly fresh in our memory, right? So that parallel kind of floated up to the surface. And I'm usually very resistant to those kinds of comparison because, of course, totalitarianism and Soviet totalitarianism in particular, which lasted for 70 years, is such, a special combination of circumstances and just horrors, right? But in that particular case, the parallels were inescapable. And I think the most important thing was, well, actually, two things were most important. And they really tell us a lot about what we have gone through with Trumpism over the last 3.5 years. One is the sense that lives are disposable. All lives are actually disposable, all but Trump's. And Hannah Arendt, when she was writing about totalitarianism, in the very first part of that book, she writes that totalitarianism is possible only in a country that can afford mass depopulation. Now think about that. It is a country that is willing to sacrifice millions of lives for the regime, right? For establishing the total control that is necessary under totalitarianism. It's something that was really impossible to imagine in the United States, but the Trump administration's reaction, both when I was writing the prologue a few months ago and even more so now, right, when he's just in total denial mode, shows us that millions of lives are completely disposable as far as he is concerned. And the other thing that it was really particular to the Chernobyl cover-up, and that is also, that we're also observing now, is the audience to which politicians, including Trump himself, are playing. Right? In the Soviet Union, the cover-up was all for the sake of reporting upstairs that everything was fine. Right? They saw the biggest nuclear disaster that had ever been seen in Chernobyl. And they were reporting upstairs that things were under control, that things were fine, because their audience was not the public. Their audience was the Central Committee. And now we're seeing that for a lot of American politicians, for basically the entire Republican Party, including a number of governors, the audience is not the public, the audience is Donald Trump. And it is necessary to report to Trump that things are okay, that the economy is reopening, because that's what he believes is necessary for his reelection.
And the question I've always had about that is why? Because, you know, there's nothing Donald Trump can do to any of these governors. There's nothing he could do to any of these senators. They're separately elected. They have their own constituencies, and they're often very different. They're from different states. Some are more rural, some are less, some are south, some are north. There's nothing he can actually do to a Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney will be reelected as United States Senator probably until he's dead. Maybe after. Maybe if his name is on the ballot, he'll still win. And so I always wonder, why do these politicians feel the need to do, as you've said, to report only good news to the dear leader?
You know, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure that Mitt Romney will be reelected after he's dead. You know, and this was, do you remember when the Trump administration had its one signature legislative achievement at the end of 2017, the tax reform passed? Yep. And he staged this long sort of celebration during which Orrin Hatch, who's been in the Senate for 250 years, said that Donald Trump was the best president in his lifetime. And so they were all playing to him. They were all performing adulation. And that was when we really saw that for the Republican Party, the audience is now not the electorate, but the president. And I think it's because he can murder them by tweet. If he really wanted to make sure that Orrin Hatch or Mitt Romney or anybody else is not reelected, he will stage an attack by tweet, and it will be impossible, or very likely impossible, to fight it off.
Yeah, and I guess that's why you'd see a Jeff Sessions, who Donald Trump has ritualistically humiliated throughout all of the time that he was his attorney general. Now genuflecting to Trump, he's gone right back to being a sycophant. There's actually no backbone in there, apparently. Or a Ted Cruz, who was humiliated. His wife was humiliated. Marco Rubio, who was humiliated, called Lil Marco, and made fun of and ridiculed by Trump. They still worship him. One wonders if that is maybe, as you said, fear of a tweet that will, you know, murder them by tweet, as you said, or is it fear of their base, saying that if you are not performing for us, for the base, enough ritualistic praise of our dear leader, then you're done? Is it that? Is it fear of losing their place?
I think it is definitely fear of losing their place, but I think the mechanics of losing their place are indirect. It's not that their base is observing them not play to Trump enough. It's that if they don't perform enough adulation of Trump, Trump is going to humiliate them by tweet, which in turn is going to lose them their base.
You have a chapter 17, your book. Now, by the way, I don't always show people their books when I read them, because this is how I read a book. I fold, I yellow mark up. You know, no one can ever borrow a book of mine because it's all mutilated, but it means I loved it.
I'm with you. Thank you. Yes, I know. That's the highest compliment.
Yes, the little corners at the end are like, oh, I need to go back to that. You titled this, and this is probably the shortest chapter in the book, A White Male Supremacist Presidency. Because the other explanation, like if you talk to demographers who look at, like I think about the Public Religion Research Institute and Robbie Jones, who is a brilliant, brilliant pollster, and he's been looking at the demographics of this country and the voters in this country for a long time, and he talks about the decline of the white male Christian population people who, you know, their conservative Christianity is their primary directive, and race being really tied to that, and that white male Christians are reacting to Trump as if he is their savior, because while he can't increase their population, he can try to decrease the population of Muslims, decrease the population of Hispanics, deport them, you know, incarcerate black people. He can do things to make them feel like they're still on top. You call this a white male supremacist presidency. It's a pretty strong term. But do you think that is part of what's happening here, that it's driven by that demographic panic?
You know, I think demographic panic in general is a huge political motivator. And I'm really glad that you're using that term, because I don't think we actually think about that enough. But I would focus on the panic part of it and not the demographic part of it, because focusing on the actual demographics makes it sound a little bit more rational than I think it actually is, right? There is a part of this country that, for some very good reasons and for some very bad reasons, has been in a state of extreme anxiety for a long time. And we know from the history of the 20th century and from the social psychology studies of the 20th century, that kind of anxiety is what gives us autocracies, right? It's when people are willing to give their power over to somebody and say, you know, just transport me back to an imaginary past where I felt secure, where I felt safe, where all the things that make me scared and anxious and unable to imagine the future, when all those things are gone, right? And along comes Trump. And the image of that imaginary past that he conjures is really, I think I say this in the book, it's like All in the Family, but different. Like, Archie Bunker is not a comic character. He actually wins. He gets to keep the house. He's just as hateful and just as ignorant and just as ridiculous, right, as that character was. But he's also victorious. It's still his house, right? And that's what I mean by the white male supremacist presidency. It's the victory of the hateful white guy who really doesn't want to look into the future, and he really wants to stay in the past. And the other thing is that, you know, any political project, whether it's a democratic project or an autocratic project, is a project that redefines who we are. Right? And in the United States, as we have, you know, changed sort of our political culture over the decades and over the centuries, with all the problems, gradually it has been more expansive, right? We have had this idea that the number of people and the kind of people who are included in the us continues to grow, right? At an excruciatingly slow pace, not in a satisfactory way, with not enough reckoning, but still continues to grow. And along comes Trump and says, no, that's canceled, right? We're actually going to contract the us. We're going to narrow that circle. And that's a huge change in American political culture, right? It's the contracting toward the center, and the center is white, male, cis, you know, all the things, nativist, which is also really new.
Yeah, and and I wonder if just to just gear off just for a second, if you feel that the recognition that desire is there, and that we are steering toward true autocracy, and I don't see how anyone can argue with that. Does it make you feel somewhat hopeful that there are some institutions that are saying, wait, including, even surprisingly enough, some of the rather retrograde members of the Supreme Court? I mean, I think on voting rights, John Roberts could not be worse, but he seems to have been trying in the last few years, when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to LGBT rights, to try to steer the court away from being a participant in our descent into autocracy. Are you hopeful about that?
Well, a couple of things I want to say about that. One, just a note, right? The day that the Supreme Court, June 15th, announced the most consequential decision in terms of LGBT rights in the history of this country, right? Which is expanding Title VII protections to discrimination on the basis of transgender status or sexual orientation. It's huge, right? And John Roberts unexpectedly joined the majority in that decision. It was a 6-3 decision. on that very same day, the Supreme Court refused to address the issue of qualified immunity, which for the police, which is a concept that was created by the Supreme Court. It is entirely within its power to sort of look at it, and at this moment in history. And so, it was a really mixed day of seeing which rights a conservative court can give us, and what is just completely off limits unless we actually, have a real political sea change in this country. So that's one point. The other point is that we can look at our institutions and say, oh, not everything has collapsed. That's great. But that's kind of how I'm seeing it, right? Yeah. It's been 3.5 years, and the rate at which Donald Trump has destroyed institutions, transformed institutions, corrupted institutions, and demonstrated all the incredible ways in which we were dependent on norms and culture for their functioning, rather than on something that was actually built in. And, I'm not saying that it is possible to design institutions to withstand a bad actor. I don't think it is. Yeah. But I think we had this incredible amount of faith in our institutions, and that has been undermined. So I really, on that particular score, I really see the glass as half full, as half empty.
Yeah, they also ruled quite very much the wrong way on whether refugees could challenge their status before they were thrown out of the country. So, right, they seem to be trying to say, let's give you one good thing so that it'll hide all of the other stuff we're going to do. It's going to be still pro-corporatist. It's still going to allow the administration to have too much power. But, in your book, so chapter 15 in the book, Surviving Autocracy, is resisting Trump's war on the media. This one's personal for me because, we're in this moment where no president likes the media, okay? President Obama was not fond of the press and cable news, right? And we all knew that. I don't think any of them have ever, maybe Kennedy, because Kennedy enjoyed sparring back and forth with journalists, and he was the first sort of TV president. And maybe FDR would have loved it, probably, to have Twitter and everything. But most presidents resist the idea of the scrutiny the media gives them. But Donald Trump, as you title your chapter, Resisting Trump's War on the Media, he has waged a war against the media, and in many ways put the media in jeopardy, in physical jeopardy. How grade the media's reaction and response to that?
Yeah, I don't. You can cut this out if you want to, but I should probably mention this. So I think a couple of years ago, you sent me an email asking how the media should cover Trump. Yes. And so I sat down to compose a response, and this is my response, Jan. It took me a while. I never answered your email because I got completely mired in writing this. Yeah. So this is actually to you. Oh. That was addressed to that email. And, there are a couple of things. A president like Donald Trump is an existential threat to journalism, right? A president who lies, a president who says things that have real life consequences, but he says that they're meaningless. For example, when he says, "Oh, let's slow down testing so that we have fewer positive results," and then says, "I was kidding," and then slows down testing. Right? And how do you report on that? Any way of reporting it undermines our sense of shared reality, our sense that things are knowable, right? Really, any way of reporting it is a loss for journalism, but not reporting it is also a loss for journalism because it's our job to report it. So we're really stuck. We're entrapped the moment he comes into office. I think the way to think about this is to think about it as harm reduction. Harms are going to occur. There is no way not to be harmed by the Trump presidency. So we in the media are just trying to reduce the amount of harm that he does, which is very, very difficult. And I think the way to do it is to constantly try to look at Trumpism as a system, right? To not report any Trumpian news as just that, as just news. Right, which has a way of normalizing Trumpism, which has a way of saying that, his letter to Kim Jong-un is diplomacy, which, insanity can't be diplomacy. I mean, or saying that his coronavirus briefings are health policy, right? Which is what happens when you report them kind of more or less straight, the way the New York Times too often does. But if you try to create context and zoom out, and every time you report on it, try to define it, try to sort of contribute to our work of describing it as a system, then perhaps we can try to lessen the harms. And I think the record has been mixed. I think there has been some amazing work. I think your show has done a great job. I think that my favorite podcast, which is Trump Inc., which bills itself as an open investigation, which I think is brilliant, has been great. You know, a lot of investigative reporting has been terrific. I think the Times has often gone way too far in sort of in extreme restraint and neutrality, which is understandable. It's also part of this entrapment problem because it's so much a part of the Times institutional culture. And I think that the Times is right to be reluctant to give up its institutional culture too easily. It is one of its biggest assets. But I think right now we're watching a reckoning. You know, what happened with the Times op-ed page and sort of the conversation that it has led to, and the argument between the proponents of the objective style and the proponents of moral clarity as a guiding light in journalism. That's an amazing conversation to finally be having out in the open. For years, it was happening only sort of in media studies classes. So I think maybe it's spurring a little bit of progress. And like every political crisis is both a real danger and a time of opportunity. And this is our opportunity.
Yeah. You write in a chapter that talks about moral authority. I think one of the biggest losses in the Trump era has been the decline of the moral authority of the United States. Now, that can mean a lot or it cannot mean a lot, right? I think in a lot of ways, presidents have used the moral authority we gained after World War II for their own advantage and for the advantage of whatever policies they wanted to put in. But for better or for worse, the United States really became a moral leader in the fight for democracies around the world after World War II, and there we were until now. You talk about, and this is something I think about all the time, about the view of history as an ongoing thing, and Americans' belief that the kind of history that happened in Poland or in Russia or in Germany can't happen here because there's something exceptional about us. But it happens all the time in lots of countries. And, Turkey was a proper democracy not long ago. But you write this, we learn to think of history as something that has already happened to other people. Our own moment, filled as it is with minutiae, destined to be forgotten, always looks smaller in comparison. As for history, the bigger the event, the more mythologized it becomes. The myth becomes a caricature of sorts. Hitler or Stalin come to look like two-dimensional villains, someone who contemporaries, as we imagine them, could not have seen as a human being. And I wonder if you can zoom out from the ways in which history will talk about Trump and see Trump more clearly than we do now. Are we missing how bad this is? Because for a lot of media, it's also somewhat entertaining. It's wacky. It's weird. He's a celebrity. Are we missing what this is?
I think we're in danger of missing what this is. And, historical comparisons are always fraught because you're always likely to get into an argument about who is worse. And the current moment's villain never looks as bad as a historical villain. And also, Trump is at this point responsible for tens of thousands of deaths, but certainly there have been many villains in history who have killed a lot more people, and even more intentionally than Trump has. So that's not terribly useful. But I think here I'm paraphrasing the historian Timothy Snyder, but I think he said something like, we're not smarter, right, or more cultured or wiser than the Germans were in the 1930s. We're not better people. The one advantage that we have is that already happened. We have the opportunity and the responsibility to learn from history. And learning from history means knowing that was possible. That was done by human beings. most of whom, and this is something that, I came across this when I was reporting a story on Nazi hunters years ago, and it has really stuck with me. Most Nazi criminals were very hard to find after the war because they went back to leading perfectly normal lives. They didn't do anything bad after the war. They continued to live within the norms and culture of whatever country they landed in. What they had done in Nazi Germany or in the countries that it had occupied was normal for that time, right? And they had committed horrific crimes. There were perfectly normal people who did that. And we're capable of horrible things as humans. We're capable of enabling really awful things. It can happen here.
Yeah. And I mean, in 1921, Tulsa, the firebombing and destruction of the Black community in Greenwood. Normal, ordinary people. I've talked to, a historian about that is an expert there. And I always ask, did any of the white citizens who did that and who burned out these people and killed 300 people, are there any oral histories? What did they tell their kids? Did they go home and say, I had a normal day today? I mean, the massacre in Wilmington, Delaware, same thing. Ordinary, normal people who did lynchings. Whenever I look at lynching photos, I always used to tell my students, don't look at the body, look at the crowd. Because those are perfectly normal church-going people who are going to go to church that Sunday as if nothing ever happened. And one of the things I do love about you as a journalist, Masha, is that you're able to do that. You can see that there's a banality to the evil that happens in this world. And I want to just really quickly veer off into a little bit about you. Tell me about your coming to this country, and what you expected of America versus what you got.
Well, so I've come to this country a couple of times. I came here when I was 14 with my family. And, we were Jewish refugees from the Soviet Union, which means we were incredibly lucky to be among the very few people who were able to leave and find a life in the United States. And we had, the luxury of refugee status at the time, which nobody gets these days. And I landed in Ronald Reagan's America. It was 1981. So that was, it took a few years to try to figure out how to think about that, right? I mean, any immigrant always lands in, a kind of an ahistoric place, right? I didn't know what came before. I thought Reagan's idea of government and democracy was America, right? And there was a queer teenager landing that. So that was quite an interesting experience. And I very quickly journeyed from somebody who completely idealized the United States to being a normal, American young person, normal American young queer person in the middle of the AIDS crisis, right? Just being absolutely horrified by the government's disregard for my community that was dying. And then I went back to, not for this reason, but as a reporter in 1991, I went back to the Soviet Union and actually ended up staying in Russia as the Soviet Union collapsed and Russia went through all its changes for more than 20 years. And then got chased out of Russia for the second time, this time for being queer, and have been back in the United States since 2013. So, I should probably mention, actually, again, I don't know if you need all this detail, but I think this is important. In 2008, 2009, I was in the States on a fellowship. So I was here during the election of 2008, and, I took my kids, who were then 7 and 10, to the polls with me, and then, in the morning or late that night, we cried in front of the TV when Obama was elected. And that for them was just the image of what a country should be, right? They were already very politically aware in Russia, and they saw how an election could work and what it could feel like. And so when we came back here, we were once again coming back to the shining city on the hill. So it's been a pretty painful number of years, but my daughter, who's now 18, has been out there protesting and occupying city halls. So maybe that's that lesson worked.
Yeah, that's a full circle experience, but that's what America will do. I think, especially if you come in from another country, there's the America that you think you're coming to, and there's the America that reacts to you, right? You know, I think for Black immigrants, it's the same thing. I'm glad that we got that information in. So I have to ask you this as I soon to release you back to your day, Masha Gessen. How does one become a post-autocracy? And can a country be a temporary autocracy and then go back to being a proper democracy?
Well, we don't quite know the answer because we're living through this particular autocratic moment in the world, right? Where we're seeing these kinds of right-wing populist-fueled autocratic regimes rising everywhere, almost synchronously. We don't know what's going to happen next. We certainly know that in the 20th century, Europe was able to recover in some significant ways. After a moment in history that's probably the most comparable to what we're living through now. I think that what we have to do here is we have to give up any illusion that we have that we need to return to pre-Trumpian normalcy. The period before 2016 is what gave us Donald Trump. It didn't make him inevitable. He wasn't predetermined, but he also grew out of that period of our history logically, right? He grew out of the post 9/11 creation of the surveillance state. He grew out of the post 9/11 concentration of power in the executive branch. He grew out of the last 20 years of the apogee of marrying money and political power. And we can't just go back to 2016 and sort of say, okay, we're going to do this right now. We have to reinvent the democracy that we have. Yeah. And I think that's what's going on out in the streets now. The question for the Democratic Party really is it capable of responding to that message and helping sustain that momentum and being propelled forward by it?
Yeah. I mean, that is a big question of whether or not the party is willing to be that expansive, because it's going to take some aggressive change in order, as you said, to not go back to what we had, but to make something that is really a multiracial, multicultural democracy. But what about the Republicans? Because I wonder what happens to a party, just as you look at autocracies around the world, when that autocracy recedes, what happens to the party of the autocrat?
That's an excellent question. I don't know that I see. I mean, fortunately, it's not my problem. But so this is just hypothetical. But I don't know that I see a path to recovery for the Republican Party. The Republican Party has become a party of enablers because of what we talked about earlier, which is that it's really sort of entered the autocratic universe. Its audience is not the voters, as it is for the Democratic Party. The audience of the Republican Party is one man. It's Donald Trump. How Republican politicians and the Republican Party as a whole are going to be able to genuinely reestablish credibility, reestablish trust with their voters after that, I have no idea. Yeah. And especially considering that if Donald Trump loses, as I hope he does, he is going to try to turn his base into a popular movement that will hijack the Republican Party. So that's a pretty scary prospect for that part of our country.
Yeah. Does it surprise you? My final question: does it surprise you that the Republican reaction to the news that Russia paid militants in Afghanistan to kill coalition troops, including American troops, and we know that at least 20 U.S. troops died. We don't know if any of them had bounties attached to them. Does it surprise you the muted reaction from the Republican Party to that news?
You know, there's certain things that are shocking without being surprising. At this point, there's nothing surprising about anything the Republican Party does because it is the party of Donald Trump. I'm not even sure it's right to call it a party, but it's still shocking, right? It's still shocking that they seem to have forgotten the ways of thinking and the idiom in which they functioned as a party and as individual politicians for decades.
It is a strange, strange world we live in, but I am so lucky to have Masha Gessen on the list of people that I can reach out to and ask questions because it's such a strange era. And you were one of the first people, Masha, to recognize and call this autocratic thinking, to call it what it was, to call it out early, and you were right. And sometimes it ain't fun being right, but you were right. So Masha Gessen, thank you so much for writing this book. It's called Surviving Autocracy. Everyone should read it. There's a good reason why this is a National Book Award winning author. So y'all need to read this book. Masha Gessen, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Surviving Autocracy, Masha Gessen, National Book Award winner, brilliant writer. It's a quick read, so you need to read this. It's really important. I'm going to read some of the things that are on the back. An indispensable voice of and for this moment by Timothy Snyder, author of On Tyranny, which is another book you should read. The Future is History is another book written by Masha Gessen, and The Man Without a Face, an unflinching indictment of the most powerful man in Russia, that one is about Vladimir Putin. Masha Gessen is one of the most brilliant people on earth. And so you know, treat yourself to understanding history. Treat yourself to understanding history, because history is not what's happening in the past. It's what's happening now. It's not what happened in the past. It's what's happening right now.
You have good reference points right now.
100%. Masha Gessen is brilliant. Thank you so much. And I'm actually very, I'm like, oh my God, that
I've
chapter,
learned a lot, right?
That chapter being that was a response to me. That was like, that kind of made my life. Right now.
Well, listen.
That chapter, actually, that makes my life.
Well, you know what? I'm going to have to go read that chapter and see if I can vision what it is that you inspired in that.
No, because I reached out to Masha because I was like, we are heading into an autocracy. How do we cover this? Because I'm like, I need to ask the people who understand this, who really deeply understand this, how do you deal with this? And I did reach out to Masha, and I actually am very touched that chapter is a response to me. That's really awesome.
We were told not to air that part, but I plan to air that part.
Yeah, anyway. No, absolutely. Hey, listen, if Gessen says it, do it. All right, so thank you guys for checking out what to read. Scaring is caring, as we like to say in the business. Sometimes you got to hear about the bad stuff to understand how to get back to the good stuff. So really check it out. Please share this episode. Please do the notifications if you're watching this on the YouTubes so that you can be notified. But we do these every Tuesday and Friday. New episodes of What to Read will drop every Tuesday and Friday. We also want you to subscribe on YouTube. But if you also just want to listen with your earses, you can subscribe on Spotify as well as on Apple iTunes. We have fixed all the issues with that. You can find the show, the podcast, by typing in What to Read on Apple iTunes. You can also type in What to Read or hashtag What to Read, all run together on Spotify so that you can find it. We want to make sure that you guys can always find it. Sharing is caring. Sharing and scaring are both caring.
Yeah.
They're both caring.
They're like M&Ms.
All we do is care.
Caring and sharing M&Ms.
There you go. And don't take out the green ones, because you know what? They taste exactly the same.
They do.
They do. All right. Thank you guys for checking it out. See you on the next What to Read.
Bye, fam.